Welcome back to class, biologists. So, here is a picture of English ivy growing up a wall. It has completely covered that wall with its own leaves and an ability to get light to power photosynthesis. This ivy has ancestors that were algae, and its algae ancestors lived in the water and could absorb water and minerals and carbon dioxide from the water that they lived in. But as a land plant, this ivy has to get water and minerals from the soil and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so we're going to talk in this chapter about how plants are able to acquire and transport those resources, how they're able to acquire water, minerals, and carbon dioxide, and how it transports those resources around the cell or around the plant as it needs them. So plants kind of live in two worlds. They live in the above ground world where they can absorb carbon dioxide, they can release oxygen, they can close their pores, their stomata to control water loss, and they can get light energy to power photosynthesis. They also live in the below ground world. In the below ground world, plants are having to absorb water and minerals and exchange gases. And so the structures and parts of a plant are going to reflect this sort of evolutionary trade-off to get the most out of those exchanges, to be able to get the most of the resources and lose as little as possible in those exchanges. Land plants have evolved vascular tissue, and that vascular tissue allows them to transport material over long distances. We've already discussed xylem and phloem. Xylem is what is transporting water and minerals, things absorbed from the roots going up to the shoots. Phloem is the food, right? F for food makes that F sound in phloem. Phloem is the food. It transports the products of photosynthesis, so sugars and other materials, from the leaves where they're made to where they're stored or to where they're needed. Leaves have a pretty broad surface area that will maximize the surface area for photosynthesis. They're able to open and close those stomata, which are those pores on a leaf, typically on the underside of a leaf. So they open the stomata to be able to get rid of oxygen, to be able to bring in carbon dioxide. But when they open the stomata, it also allows water to come out. And plants want to moderate that water loss because they need to keep water inside of the plant for the plant's use. That's especially important if they're in some place dry. They can't just keep their stomata open all the time to bring in carbon dioxide because they would lose all their water. So they're going to be able to regulate how they open and close their stomata to try to maximize the carbon dioxide while minimizing the water loss. Roots will be obtaining water and minerals. They're also involved in exchanging gases. They have to absorb essential elements. Essential elements are elements that are required by a plant to grow and reproduce. There are 17 essential elements in plants. They need both macronutrients, which have large amounts are needed, and micronutrients where only small amounts are needed. Same definitions as when we discuss these terms in animals. Both macronutrients and micronutrients have a vital function though. So just because a micronutrient is needed in small amounts doesn't make it less important. Macronutrients are typically things that the plant is going to be using to make organic molecules. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. You already know those. Sulfur, phosphorus. Pretty much reads very similar to what we saw in animals. Potassium, calcium, and magnesium. So those same necessary nutrients to create those molecules of life. Micronutrients are typically things that are going to be cofactors, things that help in enzymatic function and allow reactions to happen. This would be chlorine, iron, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, nickel, and molybdenum. Those are the nutrients that a plant needs. A plant doesn't need to eat sugar or proteins because a plant is able to make its own sugars, and from those sugars make its own proteins and other biomolecules. When a root is growing in the soil, that soil will have different layers in it, and those layers are called soil horizons. And each of those horizons has some different characteristics of it. This top layer, layer A, is a topsoil. It will be subject to weathering, so it could be worn away through wind or water. It contains humus. That word is humus. Humus is decayed organic matter. So you mow the lawn, you leave the leaf clippings there, it decays. Dog comes and leaves some waste products, a bug dies there. All that is going to decay and become humus. Also has many solid organisms in it, worms and other bugs that are still living along in here. It provides the majority of nutrients and water for plants. The B horizon is primarily clay and dissolved elements, and the C horizon is pretty much rocks. It acts as the parent material that's from which soil is formed, but really this A is where the plant is getting most of its nutrients and most of its water. You can see there's not a lot of roots coming down below A, and absolutely not coming into this sea level. The physical and chemical characteristics of the soil will affect how the plant is growing. If there are rocks and clay in the soil, they'll hold water and hold ions and allow oxygen to diffuse into the plant. Humus will provide nutrients and will support the growth of organisms that enhance the soil fertility. Plants can form symbiosis with microorganisms in the soil. A symbiosis is when two organisms live together. And there's 3 different kinds of symbiosis. Mutualism is when both partners benefit. So we discussed in a lichen how an algae and a fungus can form a lichen, and they're both benefiting from that relationship. That's mutualism. Commensalism is when one species benefits and the other is unaffected. So you have bacteria that are probably growing on your eye. It makes no difference to your health, but those bacteria are benefiting because you're providing their food and their home. That's a commensal relationship. The bacteria is benefiting and you are unaffected. Parasitism is when one organism gains and the other suffers. This would be something like an organism that makes you sick. It's gaining, it's getting all the stuff it wants, but you are suffering. Much of the symbiosis that we see in plant organisms are going to stay within mutualism and commensalism. When it turns into parasitism, that's when we start calling it a disease. Nitrogen fixation by the soil organisms allows plants to access and maintain a supply of nitrogen, so that nitrogen from the air is able to be turned into ammonia and other forms that are usable for the plants. And then the plants provide it to us. Nitrogen is an essential element of all proteins. So without it, you cannot make proteins, you cannot make enzymes, you cannot stay alive. Nitrogen availability will affect how a plant can grow. It'll affect the quantity and the quality of your produce. And soil microbes will convert nitrogen gas in the air. So here, nitrogen fixing bacteria taking nitrogen gas in the air, and they convert it into ammonia. This is called nitrogen fixation, when you take nitrogen from the air into this form of ammonia. Then there are ammonifying bacteria that create ammonium from decaying organic material. And then nitrifying bacteria convert ammonium to nitrates, and those nitrates are what are taken up by the plant roots. Some plants form symbioses with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. This would include the legumes. Legumes are your peas, your beans, your alfalfa, peanuts are in here. They form root nodules to house nitrogen-fixing symbionts. That's what you see here. these nodules that are going to house the bacteria. And the bacteria that they form an association with are called rhizobium. Alders will form symbioses with other types of nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and both legumes and alders will be rich in nitrogen. The plants are benefiting because they are getting the nitrogen that they need to grow. The microbes are benefiting by receiving sugars from the plants that they colonize. So remembering those three types of symbiosis. Microbes are benefiting, plants are benefiting. What type of symbiosis is that? Plants can also form mutualistic relationships with fungi, specifically mycorrhizal fungi. The mycorrhiza will benefit the plants by acting like extensions of the plant roots. So here are these fungal filaments. They're going to help absorb water, absorb minerals from the soil, just as if they were part of the root. They can selectively absorb phosphates and other minerals from the soil. They can release growth factors. They can release antibiotics into the soil. These mycorrhizal fungi have evolved with plants and were very most likely important to plants being able to actually start growing on the land. Epiphytes, we've mentioned orchids before. Epiphytes are commensal symbionts. So they grow anchored on other plants, and they'll absorb water and minerals from the rain. Then there are parasitic plants like dodder and mistletoe. They might not use photosynthesis. They just use their roots to tap into the plant's vascular system and absorb sugar and minerals from the host plant. So as romantic as it might be at Christmas to take some mistletoe and, hang it up, that's actually a pretty parasitic plant. Pretty, not pretty, but like a very parasitic plant. There's also carnivorous plants. This would be something like the sundew plant or the Venus flytrap. They can capture and digest animals, small insects, and they will absorb inorganic elements from their prey. They're typically found in nutrient-poor environments like bogs, where all that extra water in the bog will leach out nutrients from the soil, especially nitrogen. So by consuming those plants, the plant will get nitrogen from the proteins in the insect. All right, so now you can describe to me, why is long-distance transport important in vascular plants? Some plants can detect increased levels of light reflected from leaves of encroaching neighbors. This detection elicits stem elongation, production of erect leaves, and reduced lateral branching. How do these responses help the plant compete? And how do plants benefit from symbiotic relationships with bacteria or fungi? If you are stumped on any of these, please let me know. I'm happy to see you during my office hours or to talk with you over email. And I will see you later. We'll start talking about how things are transported through our plants in our next video. Bye.